Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking to you about yarn ball bands and how all the bits of information they contain can help you choose the right weight, fibres and number of skeins when substituting the yarn that your pattern suggests. Taking this ball of West Yorkshire Spinners signature 4-ply yarn as an example, let's take a look at the ball band. We have the fibre information and also the yarn weight, which is 4-ply. If you need to substitute the recommended yarn in a pattern because the original has been discontinued, maybe you need a budget alternative or just fancy trying something different, then the yarn weight is the thing that you need to match in order to be able to knit to the correct gauge and make your finished object fit. If you choose a yarn in a thicker or a thinner weight instead, you risk your project being a totally different size than you intended, as well as buying too much or too little yarn for it. Choosing yarn in the same weight stated in your pattern is essential for knitting your finished item to the correct size, and that's where gauge comes in. The yarn band might have a visual chart like this, or the information might simply be stated as something like tension, 28 stitches to 30 rows. Whichever form is used, it's the gauge on your knitting pattern that you need to follow. Over here we've got the manufacturer's suggested needle size when you're knitting with this yarn, which is 3.25 millimeters. Your pattern might suggest a different needle size, but this just gives you a rough idea. What's really important is finding the right needle size for you to be able to knit to the gauge suggested in the pattern. For example, let's say you're knitting a test swatch for a sweater and you end up with too many stitches per 10 centimeters. This simply means that you're knitting tight, and you need to try knitting the swatch again with larger size needles. If you experience the opposite, that you end up knitting with too few stitches, you're knitting loosely and you need to switch to smaller size needles to tighten up that knitting and make your pattern work. This section of the yarn ball band tells us how much this ball of yarn weighs, 100 grams. And how many meters or yards we get in that 100 grams, 400 meters or 437 yards of yarn. You can use this information to find out how many balls of yarn you need for your project. So I wanted to knit Petite Knits No Frills Sweater, which suggests a 4-ply merino yarn held together with a single strand of mohair. But instead I wanted to use the yarn from the Norwegian pelt sheep, which is fluffy and light and shimmery and gorgeous all at the same time. The yarn I wanted to use matched the weight of that in the pattern, with a similar fibre makeup that would make a great substitution. Taking the meterage listed for my size in the pattern, I made this calculation. I divided the total meters of yarn needed for my project by the meters on the ball band of the substituted yarn. This told me how many skeins I needed of my substitution yarn for my project. When you look at the yarn ball band, you'll also typically see the care information. This will show you what you need to do to wash your knits safely to keep them looking good. Some companies will use standard laundry symbols and others might simply spell it out for you. Lastly, on the ball band, you'll have the name of the yarn colour. This could be a word, like here we have wood pigeon as the name of the colourway, but it could be a number instead or a combination of both. You'll also typically have the number of the Dyelot for your ball of yarn. As a yarn company or an indie dyer colours the yarn, there might be slight shade differences between each dye session, which could show up in your finished knitting unwanted and make the overall colour look ununiform. But this is usually something that the seller will be on the lookout for when you're ordering multiple skeins of yarn for a project. The Dyelot information can also be really handy to have at your fingertips if you need to take a trip back to the shop to order another ball of yarn so that you can finish your project.